They're open this hearing of the Senate Foreign Affairs, Defence and Trade References Committee into Australia's Defence Honours and Awards System. The committee is conducting today's hearing via video conference with some witnesses joining us from Canberra. I'm Senator Sharma, the chair of the committee, and I'm joined online by Senator Ciccone, Senator Fawcett, Senator Darmingham and Senator Roberts. These are public proceedings being video streamed live via the Parliament's website, and a Hansard transcript is being made. I remind all witnesses that in giving evidence to the committee, they are protected by parliamentary privilege. It is unlawful for anyone to threaten or disadvantage a witness on account of evidence given to a committee, and such action may be treated by the Senate as a contempt. It is also a contempt to give false or misleading evidence. Witnesses also have a right to request to be heard in camera. I remind any witnesses appearing via video conference, which I think is everyone today, and who are not speaking, to please mute their microphones. The committee understands that many of you have lived experiences within the Australian Defence Force and the Defence Honours and Awards system more broadly. Your evidence is important to the committee's understanding of the issues raised. However, I do request that people refrain from adversely commenting upon others. I would now, provided they're available, like to welcome representatives from the Australian Peacekeeper and Peacemaker Veterans Association Limited. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, and before we begin, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Senator, my name is Ian Lindgren and I'm the chairperson of the Australian Peacekeeper and Peacemaker Veterans Association.
Thank you, and alongside you?
Yep, Senator, I'm Paul Copeland, long-term member of the Australian Peacekeeper Peacemaker Veterans Association and lead advocate for retrospective reclassification and recognition issues.
Thank you so much. I'd now invite you to make a short opening statement if you wish, and at the conclusion of any remarks I'll invite members of the committee to ask questions.
Thank you very much, Senators. Thank you for the opportunity to appear here today. The Australian Peacekeeper and Peacemaker Veterans Association, or Peacekeepers for short, otherwise you'll get rather tongue-tied in trying to say it. We represent our members and their families, but also we represent the 80-odd thousand peacekeepers that have served for Australia since the 60s, 70s and onwards, those that are alive today. In addition to that, we assist and support any veteran and veteran family member that requests support and assistance, and furthermore, quite uniquely, we support all those service providers to the veteran community that require help, such as service providers that might be, for example, $1 or $2 million behind in invoices that are due for payment, or service providers that require resolution to issues with the Commonwealth, be it DVA or any other department. We believe quite wholeheartedly in a united veteran community. Now, this is my last week as chairperson in this role, and I'll talk for about another 2 minutes before handing over to Paul Copeland, who will talk about things in detail. I will suggest a solution, a way to resolve what's been discussed and presented to the reference committee. And I'll do this because most ex-service organisations work at the day-to-day level, where they handle claims, where they handle grievances and all other routine issues. We do that to some extent, but our main area of operations is at the strategic enterprise, or when you refer to the recent Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, we work at the ecosystem level, the veteran and defence ecosystem level. It's not an area that many people are common with, but it's particularly important to comprehend because it studies the interactions between the ministers, the portfolios, the departmental secretaries, everybody that's involved and why they make the decisions and what drives them, so that we can assist when you stand back and look at the strategic perspective. It's only then that the forest doesn't get in the way of the trees. In short, the Royal Commission on Defence and Veteran Suicide identified a dysfunctional area in defence and the veteran ecosystem. But that's not unique. As you would have heard, there are many veterans and veteran family members that find the honours and awards system just as dysfunctional. In our opinion, we conceptualise the whole veteran ecosystem as one three-dimensional concept where you enlist at one period and then you progress through it from that general enlistment through to a time when you transition into a civilian, and then at the end of time when there are no longer any services that are required to you or your family members. So this places us in a unique perspective when we advise on issues, and we see that veterans interact with entities such as the ATO, banks, the Defence Housing Authority, many other entities, and they each have their own method of governance. The impact of that governance on veterans and veteran family members can be good, can be poor, and can be in between. But whatever the case, I don't believe that anybody ever wakes up and says, it's my purpose today to give a veteran and a veteran family member a bad day. They're just stuck with the system they've got. And too many people often think that it is too hard to overcome. And if I had $1 for every time that has been said to me when I've been consulting nationally and internationally, I'd be a particularly rich person. But I'm not. I'm just an average person, but I observe it every day. And this is one of those systems where people often believe it is too complex to overcome. And I want to just, in closing my statement, just highlight a couple of areas that are of certain concern to me and may not be, and certainly aren't obvious to quite a lot of people. The first is the service differential. This has an impact on honours and awards, and for those that are aware of it, I would ask you, is it the Australian community's expectation that warlike and non-warlike service has a baseline based on the Vietnam War? I'm thankful that the baseline isn't World War I, where we lost 5,000 to 10,000 people a day, because if that was the case, then there'd be very, very, very few honours and awards awarded, because thankfully we lose much less numbers of people in warfare today. But that has an impact on honours and awards and how things are considered and how people are recognised and the moral injury, the trauma that it causes them. And it does, in some instances, take them to a state close to suicidality. And when you consider that you've got a terms of reference that you must work within, so too did the Royal Commission on Defence and Veteran Suicide. Yet the Defence and Veteran Suicide was constrained by what was a very good terms of reference and was unable to look at what I just described and what you've seen, the trauma during the presentations that veterans have. And I'd just like you to hold that in the back of your mind. It is our opinion that the solution that was given for veteran wellbeing and veteran suicidality, in that an independent entity is needed to take a step back and be in a position to call out and compel people to observe and state the obvious, in some cases the frankly ridiculous, and compel participants to resolve it, is something that is needed when you consider your recommendations. And I'll end on that statement and hand over to Paul.
Thank you, Ian. I probably just want to go down to the areas of the recognition itself now, and fully support what Ian is saying in that aspect, in terms of moral injury and demoralisation. Defence Honours and Awards is a very emotive issue for those who serve. The past experience of the SAS squadron that was actually taken off the Orbat has significantly affected the psyche of those veterans who served in that squadron since the Borneo campaign in 1965 through Vietnam, and undoubtedly for those who continued to serve until the day it was disestablished or taken off the Orbat. The demoralisation of that can't be underestimated. It was a cruel and hard act on those soldiers. But moving forward from that, in the background, I've been doing this since 1999 to now in terms of Defence Honours and Awards, lobbying for better recognition of our peacekeepers, for example, those who have done humanitarian aid, disaster relief operations, those who have done some smaller operations that have been have been refused but not considered for recognition. Those areas there are growing in number. The AUSParliament currently facilitates two working groups, one for retrospective recognition of service and the other is for reclassification of service, that is the service type rendered. We found that there is a growing list of points that have been raised by veterans and affected families that people have been unrecognised and therefore, in their view, a country that realistically has under-recognised their efforts for their courage, service and sacrifice for Australia. The moral injury part of it is their perception of having done the right thing and gone above and beyond what is normally recalled and required within their defence service. But having to be then told you won't be recognised because you miss out on a particular point in argument or administrative law makes it very difficult for those people to actually swallow. And a lot of them go to the grave without knowing that they've been recognised or not. Point in fact being, for example, the Vietnam War with Delta Company 6 RER, when it took decades from Colonel Harry Smith's efforts to see that company recognised for some of the most, one of the most largest battles in the Vietnam War at that time. The grievance from all of this cannot be really told in a very short period of time. And the grievance is that veterans still are out there have with the actual system that is in place now. And the system needs to be fixed. The system is subjective and the system has not actually taken into consideration the special nature of service that's been taken outside of the normal context of peacetime service. That needs to be considered. The 237-page submission that was lodged on behalf of the AUSParliament from that veteran group, which may go back into 2012, the 2014 refusal, withheld and forfeited inquiry, details just where those shortfalls are in a number of cases. But we've found more and more areas and problems associated with non-recognition in that aspect. Recognition is important to veterans. It makes them proud. It makes them proud to have served Australia. It gives them the incentive that they have done something for Australia and they're proud of it. It's a symbol of acknowledgement. It's a symbol of respect that they've actually done something out of the ordinary. But we have a system that's in place at the moment that does not recognise some of those smaller operations, and because they're tied around the axles with, to use a term I suppose, tied around the axles in technical jargon that shouldn't be there in the first place. So it shouldn't be a case of when a veteran comes to defence and says, I'd like to...
Mr Copeland, so I'm conscious we do have other witnesses, so would you mind just wrapping up your opening statement, because we would like to get to questions.
Thank you. There's a lot to cover, I suppose, but thank you. I just want to probably rehash that There's been a raft of issues that's still ongoing. Those issues are growing. We need to have resolution to these. We need to have a better system in place that is not subjective and is fair and equal and considers those who have done something outside of the normal peacetime service for Australia.
Thank you so much, Mr Copeland. Mr Lindgren, I believe Senator Fawcett has some questions, and then I'll go to Senator Darmingham. And if anyone else has questions, if they could just let me know, please. Senator Fawcett, you have a call.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just a couple of quick questions, if I could. In part 6 of your submission, you talk about the role of Prime Minister in Cabinet. You believe that is too influential in the process. Could you give us a little more detail on that, please?
Yeah, it seems the case that in the dealings that we've had with Defence, there's always been a finger pointed at the Prime Minister and Cabinet National Symbols Office. That's what it was called some decades ago. There seems to be an area where there's a dictation that there should be only the one medal for the one piece of service, which has been well and truly compromised since, may I say, World War I onward until recent times with the introduction of the Australian Operational Service Medal. So when it comes to going to the Defence Honours and Awards and Appeals Tribunal, it's noted that they do have an input or an influence into that. I'm not sure that the PMNC Awards Office there acts in the best interests and has a fair understanding of what Defence Service is about when deployed on operations overseas. Probably one of the sticking points there would be the Humanitarian Overseas Service Medal, which is actually administered by them. When you've had Defence go to the PMNC and say we have an operation from, for example, Operation Shaddock, when the tsunami hit the PNG coast, we sent a team there to resolve the issue. There were bodies being retrieved out of trees. On national television, a surgeon broke down and cried from the actual trauma that he experienced in that place. And that operation to this day, whilst supported fully by the then Major General Peter Cosgrove, was actually rejected by that office. That's one example.
Sure, thank you. I'm just going to move on quickly because I'm conscious of time here. In paragraph 14 of your submission, you talk about the need for greater flexibility. In paragraph 19, you offer up the New Zealand Honours and Awards system as an exemplar of something with more flexibility. Could you just very briefly describe what you see the benefits of that and how you avoid the potential uncertainty of people that if the rules aren't set, of personal influence or bias that may get different outcomes for different veterans who've rendered similar service?
The New Zealand system seems to be a lot more fairer than the Australian one. They seem to they have a system where it actually recognises both civilians and military under the one branch, whereas Australia has a sort of a dissipated system, and it takes quite a great deal of effort to actually get each side to agree to a particular point of recognition. So with that, within that seems to be, within New Zealand, a single point access. It's handled by their NZDF, and the system seems to be a lot fairer in terms of recognising things like special service. For example, if I can go to the air crash that happened at Erebus in the Antarctica, that was an award that was given out, not given out I should say, awarded to those recipients. And in Australia we wouldn't have that sort of similar system. They seem to recognise each individual operation on a special nature, and they'll make or strike a special medal for that.
Sure. And last question, some other submitters have highlighted that in previous conflicts there's been an end of war list for peacekeepers where you're deployed for a particular period or activity, for example with the UN or other areas where we've deployed. Would you support a similar process to sort of finalise make sure there are no outstanding recommendations from commanders that have not been dealt with.
I fully agree with that point, and that's been one that's been spoken about for some decades now, since our heavily involved contributions from 1989 through to, say, 1994-95 with Namibia, Cambodia, Rwanda, Somalia, for example. Those particular operations saw a great deal of difficulty. It was our first venture out there into unsupported operations, and there were a number of individuals there that were recognised by commanders but not given what we would term as the correct award. It was basically downgraded to something like a commendation, for example.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Fawcett. Senator Darmingham, if you're online, the call's yours.
Thank you. Senator Fawcett covered part of the question that I had. So I guess so around paragraph 14 of your submission, and you talk about the flexibility. We've heard from different witnesses about this question of the definition change from inaction to warlike operations. How do we reconcile the different views that we have heard from different witnesses? And what's your, because it seems that you perhaps are agnostic around that, and you talk about that really it should be based around flexibility. So I just wondered if you could talk about that a bit more, because that seems to be, a point of contention. And I think, as Senator Fawcett kind of identified earlier, having flexibility, I guess, then renders the opportunity for further questioning around, awarding and not awarding. And, can you just talk about, how do we improve the system if this is already a problem and we've got a whole range of views about the criteria?
Well, the Distinguished Awards and the Gallantry Awards, for example, have been realistically afforded to people who have perhaps been warfighters in that respect. When I'm sort of referring into those aspects, I'm talking about people who have been involved in, say, for example, communications, perhaps some sort of force support, and then I'm talking about United Nations operations per se. People serving in some of the most dangerous places on the planet that may have done something that was noteworthy and worthwhile recognising. But because the actual system said that they were, say, for example, on non-warlike service at that time, well, then they wouldn't be actually counted or considered for a Distinguished or Gallantry Award. It'll be something more like a Bravery Award if that actually goes through, which is very rare to see. Secondly, they may be referred to the Conspicuous Service Awards, which realistically anybody serving in Australia can get a Conspicuous Service Medal or Cross for doing an outstanding job in what they do and matching that criteria. But when it's in a dangerous situation, which can be in a non-warlike situation, for example, in the Middle East at this moment, there would be individuals, I would suggest, that may be overlooked with the current system that's in place.
Okay.
I think, Senator, to the Caballo massacre, for example, in April 1995, was one that was considered non-warlike until the massacre occurred. And I've only just found out just recently how quickly it was temporarily confirmed to be a warlike situation, in order that the proper recognition that would be given to those that took part. But that rapid nature of change in the definition of the experience of those on the ground isn't seen today. It takes 6 to 12 months for a change to occur.
Okay. Thank you.
Thanks, Senator Darmingham. Senator Roberts, I think you had some questions, and then we will wrap up and move to the next witness. Please go ahead, Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you both for appearing today, and thank you for your service and for your submission. This is a very important issue, as I see it, and I know you see it as important. One of the core issues the military is facing today is a recruitment and retention crisis. The Australian Defence Force is currently struggling to get more people into the military, and more importantly, the ADF can't keep the people that are already there. They're leaving. My opinion is that morale is the #1 issue contributing to that crisis. It's our #1 strategic weapon, mateship and morale. Could I ask you to first explain how even just a feeling there's a lack of recognition or feeling that an issue in awards hasn't been dealt with objectively or impartially affects morale?
Senator, I think you're quite correct, and in fact, it has been the Australian way of life since Federation that those that are serving in uniform and those that have transitioned can come back together and fill positions within the militia, as it was called in World War II, and operate as an active service participant. These are the people that are having grievances, and when they aren't comfortable, when they're unhappy, they contribute to what you've just described, and so I think that's one of the reasons why it's very important to adhere to listen to what they've said, because they provide an insight into what is contributing, because they're the parents and the grandparents of those that would be volunteering for service. Paul, you got anything to add?
I'll probably, if I can just refer to the analogy that I used earlier about the disbandment of the 2nd SAS Squadron, I think that had a significant effect on morale, and we lost a lot of highly trained individuals that took years to train, with years of experience and background, through a decision that was made that affected them most dramatically. And I think we lost a lot of people with that, and we lost a lot of people who had faith in the system at the time.
And possibly, if you could comment, we lost a lot of people who are still enlisted, but we lost them morally or emotionally. And that'll affect lives. When we have a lack of objectivity or impartiality, that destroys trust, doesn't it? And trust must be the most important thing, surely. I've never been in combat, but I'm guessing it must be the most important thing, because it's been told to me by some senior people in the Defence Forces in the past that the thing that makes the Australian Armed Forces different is that they can trust, each person can trust the person next to them, the training, the discipline, the responsibility, what's at stake. So when trust is destroyed, it destroys that, doesn't it?
I think it has an overall effect on the whole organisation. The point when you go through recruit training is to actually work as a team together and trust the man next to you. When you're actually in the field relying on that individual is there to look after you and potentially one day save your life. It's called the mateship, and it's called the mate looking after you in the field. You lose that trust, then you're not really going to have a cohesive fighting force on the ground.
And it's even more important, or as important certainly, that we have trust, that an enlisted man or woman has trust in their commanders of the Defence Forces, people who are awarding these medals, for example.
I think there's been a great deal of scepticism over that, and there's been a great deal of disappointment from those in the lower ranks who are currently serving, most certainly from the veteran aspect as well.
Yes, you've already mentioned that morale of veterans is an important part of the recruitment and retention of the current military. You've already said that. Could you elaborate on the role of transparency? Because as I see it, I think you've both said that there's an impact of emotion. Transparency, in my experience, reduces emotion. It reduces the impact of that emotion. Because when it's fair and seen to be fair, people lack the emotion. They don't have any gripe.
It's agreed with your transparency, because if people see that and they're made aware of the situation and it's explained to them, and it's a fair sort of decision, then people will carry on and continue on to serve in that respect. The transparency is most important.
And that leads to another thing that's very valued amongst Australians, not only mateship, but fairness. If fairness is not shown, then it's not seen.
Yes, this is true, Senator. And again, I'll just take back to current situation in Lebanon, on the Lebanon border with Israel, where up until recently there are 1,000 rounds landing a month in the general area of operations where our 12 peacekeepers are located, where they are being hit with white phos on a regular basis every single day and being required to be underground for months at a time. Yet they're where everybody around them is on a warlike footing, so to speak, yet our peacekeepers are not. They're on a peacekeeping footing and are being recognised and rewarded for being peacekeepers. Yet when I ask for those that have returned to speak on Peacekeeper Day, the majority of them are in hospital or under some form of mental care, and a contributing factor to that is their lack of recognition and the lack of ability to pass their concerns up through the chain of command. It doesn't get past the first or second stop. And these are things that need to be addressed impartially and compel people to indicate why they didn't pass those issues onwards.
Thank you. I've got several more questions, but I'll make this the last one, Chair. Would you support honours and awards being taken out of the defence hierarchy and out of the political hierarchy to an independent body, potentially a body other than the Honours and Awards Tribunal? Oh, I can see the heads nodding.
Most definitely, and I think the Royal Commission in Defence and Veterans Suicide gives a model that's we've spent a considerable amount of money on, and can be one that can be reused, not repurposed to expand its scope, but reused for this and any other system that's identified as being dysfunctional in any way, shape or form.
Just one final little question that I thought of, Chair, please. Is there a perception of a two-tier system when it comes to awards? Which, again, if there is, then that destroys trust. One for the top brass, one for the ranks.
Yes, there is. That perception has been there for a long time.
Look, I want to thank you for the frankness and the brevity of your answers, so much appreciated. I have got other questions, but I'll leave it there, Chair, in the interest of time.
Thanks, Senator.
You're muted, Chair.
Thank you. Just wanted to thank you, Mr. Lingard and Mr. Copeland, for your appearance today and your submission. I don't believe there are any questions you took on notice. A full Hansard or transcript of this hearing will be available in coming days. And thank you once again for your appearance and your service. And I would now like to welcome via video conference Mrs. Ruth Rogers. Mrs. Rogers, I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the record, and before moving to an opening statement, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yes, my name is Ruth Rogers. I'm from Singleton, New South Wales. I am a veteran's wife, mother, sister and a daughter. So I'm here to represent, actually, I'm no organisation, I'm just an independent witness.
All right. Thank you, Mrs. Rogers. Mrs. Rogers, we do have your submission to the inquiry, and I thank you for providing such a detailed and thoughtful submission. Would you like to make an opening statement to the committee before we proceed to questions?
Yes, definitely. Thank you for the opportunity to be able to speak on this as well. To me, the awards and honours system, it plays a crucial role in maintaining not only just the morale, but recognising all individuals and collective achievements that they do or achieve within the time that they are either past servicing, present servicing or future servicing members. To receive an award is an honour. It's a tangible recognition of an individual's hard work and sacrifices. But not only that, it gives them the recognition that not only reinforces a sense of purpose but also pride within their role within the ADF. It affects their morale. With the honours and awards system, I find that it is not clearly transparent and can lead, sorry, I'm a bit nervous about this, but it can also, when they see their superiors, the younger junior soldiers, when they see the superiors or colleagues receiving honours for non-operational tasks such as administrative or home duties, it leads to frustration, disillusionment and even resentment. This can affect the morale of the soldiers or any defence member. It also affects the morale of families of the person that may have been out there in many, many deployments and have been caught up in any type of conflicts or even peacekeeping operations. I have a sister that has been worked with the Defence Force for nearly 30 years. She suffered terrible burnout. She put so much into the Defence Force and was well recognised by many. Unfortunately, she left the Defence Force disillusioned due to the fact that she could see peers around her not just receiving awards, she's not a materialistic person or anything else. She just thinks that the recognition should go to the people that deserve it. I have a son that served in 3 tours. He did get commendated for saving the life of 5 Afghan nationals. To me, that was a state of bravery. He has never been recognised for that, and I think that's more my point as a mother, but as a soldier that gave his life the whole time while he was in Afghanistan as a field first aider, I feel that it was not only him, but there's other people within the Defence Force that have done brave honours like this and have never been recognised. It takes into leadership as well. I mean, if you've got a serious morale issue within the ranks, it affects they don't have the respect for their leaders. It can diminish the leadership role of the person that is involved or the platoon, especially in a warlike scenario or deployment where they go overseas. And to me, it is just that the higher ranks sometimes and it's well known that there's this pat on the back scenario, or, like, I'll present you with an award, I'll nominate you if you nominate me. And I understand that, some officers and leaders and brigadiers that deserve these awards, but I think there needs to be a more fair and more just and more justice within how this is done. It needs to be taken away from the Defence Honours and Awards Review Committee and have an independent model where they can be all fairly looked at, and that way that overall the awards can be presented to the lower ranks as much as the higher ranking officers. There's a lot more in my submission, and I'm sure that everybody has read them. But to me, like, if you're going overseas, if the one day in overseas, to me, does not cut any way of getting a medal or an honour, or home duties, yes, if you've gone over and above. But again, it has to ensure that the criteria for the awards is clearly defined and communicated across all ranks. It has to be particular focus on ensuring that the contributions of those in high risk and operational areas is properly acknowledged. The one instance I can honestly say, and it's only just pretty well sure that it's only been probably 18 months, not even 18 months, is the Maralinga. My father was a Maralinga veteran. He lost his life due to issues that came out of Maralinga. Now, the medal has now been struck by the King, and it can be awarded. But my father is now gone, and it's, as far as I'm concerned, it is now 50, 55 years or whatever the time is, too late for those ones that have passed. And there's other effects too with the other wars that need to be recognised, but that can take on forever. So I work now, just in closing, I work with veterans. I have a psychology degree. I do this voluntary. I do not charge my veterans. I do not charge frontline service members. I volunteer with Soldier On, Australian Families and Military, and also within the Singleton military area with the RSL sub-branch. I am their welfare officer. I see a lot of struggles that come out of the RSL and out of legacy, and especially now with our younger soldiers with Soldier On. It is really concerning that the mental health of our society, because of some of this, is not recognised by the honours and awards system. And as you know, mental health is one of the, well, being a psychologist is one of my biggest concerns. In closing, I'd like to say, while the awards and the system is crucial for maintaining morale, it must be equitable and reflective of the sacrifices made by all members, especially those on the front lines. When personnel perceive that the system is unjust, it leads to frustration, cynicism, a breakdown of trust between different ranks, and the system needs to be fair, transparent, and based on the merit to ensure that all service members feel valued, regardless of their rank or role. Addressing these concerns would require a concerted effort from senior leadership to engage with enlisted personnel, improve the transparency of the awards process, ensure that the recognition is distributed equitably. So thank you for listening to that, and I hope it came across as some common sense.
It did, absolutely. Thank you, Mrs. Rogers, for your time and your submission today, and thank you as well for your service and your family's service to our nation, including your son and your sister, who I heard mentioned. I believe Senator Fawcett has some questions, so we'll turn first of all to him. Senator Fawcett.
Thank you. Ms. Rogers, thanks for your submission. In the first of your strategies that are outlined in your submission, you say that the criteria for awards should be clearly defined and communicated across all ranks and have a particular focus on the contributions of those in high risk or operational roles. So two questions. How important is it that the definitions are clear? Because we've had some other submitters saying they should be more flexible. So can you comment on why you think it's important that they are very clear criteria? And secondly, do you support the view that we should go back to having awards that are in action and then potentially other awards for command and other things that may be in rear areas or recognising the responsibility of command but not putting the inaction aspect to it?
Thank you, Senator. On the first one, I honestly believe that we need to have as an input. Sorry, can you repeat your first question?
Sure. You say here that the criteria for awards should be clearly defined, and that's been the case that many people have put over the years, that removes ambiguity and gives very clear guidelines. Other people in submissions are saying we should be more flexible in terms of the decision making. So I'm just wondering what you see the benefit is of having clear definitions around the criteria, and whether you think that flexibility is a good or a bad thing, given your statement there.
Thank you. Thank you for repeating that for me. I do believe that it should be more clearly defined, because clear definition to me is a good guideline, because it actually allows the nominator or even the committee to go through and make sure that they have met all the criteria. Flexibility to me is how do you control flexibility? How far do you take flexibility? But being defined, it's just like a constitution or a business plan. It's defined. Then to me, if you met, like there's different criteria, like you might have been overseas for more than 8 months, you've met with a certain, you might have been caught up in a firefight where you've received no recognition, and that's just not you. I mean, that's also the platoon or your fellow soldiers as well, or your fellow members. At home, it should be at home. It should be a different set of awards, not in warlike situations. We have people still out there today that have not, of late, we've only just had Somalia recognised. We've just got Rwanda started recognised. Like they're different wars that we don't classify as real warlike, they're warlike, but it's taken a lot of years for them to be recognised for their service. So to me, it's got to be a clear, when you define something, it is a clear set of points and a clear set of criteria that must be adhered to. And that should be able to cut out a lot of the ones that are applying for an award that actually do not meet that full set of tough criteria.
Sure, thank you. The other question was around the concern you and other people have raised about the apparent disparity of senior officers being awarded things like the DSC, which traditionally was for inaction, now is for warlike, and it appears many witnesses have said that it's almost like part of your posting order. You also get the application for the DSC and you receive when you come home. There have been moves in the past to create a recognition for the responsibilities of command, and so senior commanders would receive that, recognising they've commanded, but not conflated with the awards that have traditionally been available for those who have rendered distinguished service in action. Would you support that kind of recognition that there are roles, whether it's command, but separating that inaction part?
That is one I would really support, because inaction is totally different to being home and to command. I know it's a tough job to be a commander. I'm in touch with the School of Infantry here in Singleton and have done for 37 years. And I've seen many commanders come, and some, we were in peace, some of that was in peacetime. So, and there's, yes, I agree it's got to be split. It has to be split, and it's got to be recognised as either warlike or operational is probably a better word, because you've still got peacekeepers out there that are, military personnel that are overseas still doing peacekeeping missions. So to me, it should be operational, and also, again, for those that command.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Senator Fawcett. Senator Roberts, did you have questions for Mrs. Rogers? Otherwise I do, but if...
Yes, I do. Thanks, Chair.
Go ahead, Senator Roberts.
Thank you. And thank you, Ms. Rogers, for appearing today. Thank you for what you're doing. The work you're doing is very, very important. I also want to acknowledge the fact that you have had a father, siblings, son. Is there anyone else I missed?
Yes, I have a husband that served for 30 years.
That's right. Thank you. Thank you. And did I hear you correctly? I might not have been paying complete attention, that you lost a son to action?
No, I didn't lose a son. My son was a field first aider in Afghanistan with 7RAR, and he did Afghanistan, Iraq, and Timor, and he was commendated for saving the life of 5 Afghan nationals.
Thank you. Coming back to Senator Fawcett's question and your answer, specific criteria are necessary to make things objective, make award objective. I get that. Don't you also need flexibility for unique circumstances? Because things today are not the same as they were in the trenches at Gallipoli or in Europe back in the First World War. Providing that flexibility is justified and comes with justification. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does make sense. And I do agree with that. I mean, like you said, there are special circumstances. I mean, may I say, can I just bring up an incident last week up towards Lismore? I mean, that's special. To me, that's special circumstances where we had a military accident. I mean, because we do have them in peacetime while they're in training. So with that type of flexibility, yes, I would actually support that, because, like I said, there are special circumstances.
Yes, with justification, because we can't know everything that's going to happen.
No.
In point 5 of your submission, you mentioned the psychological impact of disparity. We've heard evidence in this inquiry from soldiers who served in the most elite tiers of our special forces. They've been in the highest stress and highest risk environments anyone could imagine. In fact, difficult to imagine. They have had to fight for recognition. They shouldn't have had to, and I imagine many would give up that fight. Given we've just had the Royal Commission into Defence and Veteran Suicide, can I ask you to please explain the link between unfairness in awards and honours and psychological harm?
Well, those personnel that serve in very high-risk areas, I mean, and one of the units that come to mind is one that they may not even be home for 2, 3 months, 4 months, and they may do a lot of deployments for a lot of years. But it's the mental toll that they don't get recognised, not just on the soldier but the family, because the family sees them going overseas, they put their lives at risk, they come back, the husband might have pillow talk and just say, oh, look, such and such got an award. Why didn't we get recognised, or I get recognised, or my mate get recognised? So that has an impact just not on that soldier but on other soldiers or other personnel, but also the family unit. And, and when you see someone getting it for an award for something that they did in a Q store, and sorry, I don't mean to be, a little bit discriminative here, but good work. There's other awards out there within the military system, like, I used to be called Soldiers Medallion, which was given to personnel in those days for recognition within the home base without having to be given a high military honour. And I've seen it happen over the years, and it does. Psychologically, it takes a toll on personnel for that reason.
Thank you. Could you go more to the link, or explain the link between unfairness in awards? Perhaps you could describe the feelings in soldiers that perceive that unfairness and the need that's not being met that leads to their psychological harm. What are the needs not being met?
The needs that not being met is probably recognition for their hard work and their skills. They're not valued equally. And they have a sense of betrayal as well. But it's the it's the mental and burnout. I mean, you keep going out on, and to me, burnout is, it's not PTSD. Burnout is a different form of mental health. But it is also, if they see this on a day-to-day basis, or on a, you know, within the award system, the personnel don't feel as if, like I said, they don't feel as if their skills are valued. And as you said, there's a lot of members that are leaving the Defence Force. We've got highly skilled members that leave the Defence Force because they're disillusioned. They're not just disillusioned, but they've had enough of the day-to-day mental anguishes within the Defence Force. And I think there's a lot more we can address with mental health within Defence members. I've nursed my son twice through post-traumatic stress, and I mean literally twice. And when I say I've nursed him through it, it is he was put back into our care. And then when he was put back into our care, we had to be the psychologist, we had to be the minds person, we had to take doors off, he wasn't allowed to shower on his own, he wasn't, you know, and for a 29-year-old male at the time, that's very, very degrading, but that's more on the mental health side of the other. And a lot of that was because when he was in overseas deployments, it was the recognition of someone higher than them that actually just sat in the office and, yes, he commanded. But, and I know it's a tough job to command and to do this and bring our boys and girls home safe, but to be recognised, just to be recognised for something that they have done out of outside the realms of their training or whatever, does have a mental impact on them.
Thank you so much for trusting us to share that personal experience. It must have been very difficult for you as a mother.
It was very difficult, and at the time we were just lucky that he was posted to Singleton as a trainer, and we were very lucky that we had a great CO and a regimental sergeant major that helped us through it.
Thank you. Do you think there could be merit in, in taking awards and honours to a body independent of the chain of command and independent of politics?
I think there needs to be a board or a committee formed, but it needs to have military personnel on there that know what is happening with the combats of war, you know, what happens within the combats of war, understand what the actual criteria is for all the awards. I do think it needs to come away from politics, but our Governor General still needs to be involved in this. And also maybe have on some of the committees I'm on within the Singleton area, we actually have a representative, say, from a senator or someone else, but they've got to apply, just like with the resume, and have, you know, like it might be a policy that, you know, one of your policy areas that they put you into that position. But to me, it should be like for like. It should be someone that's got life skills, someone that has, as my father used to say, been there, done that. It's not an easy. If someone doesn't understand the military and everything else that goes with it, then it makes it harder and harder all the time. But if you've got someone that has the knowledge of military and but you must have your governing care, as you know, because they're the ones that the awards are given out from.
Thank you. Last question, Chair. So transparency, Ms. Rogers, is vital. Even if the independent body came to the same decision that's been made today, it could be psychologically beneficial if that person feels like it's been dealt with independently and fairly. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That is definitely correct.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Chair.
Thank you so much, Senator Roberts. Thank you very much, Mrs. Rogers, for your appearance today. You and your family's service to our nation as well, and the thoughtful manner of your contributions and suggestions to this committee. I do appreciate it very much. Thank you.
Thank you, and thank you for today, and thank you for having my submission.
Thank you. I would now like to welcome via video conference representatives from the rifle company Butterworth Review Group. I understand that information on parliamentary privilege and the protection of witnesses giving evidence to Senate committees has been provided to you. For the Hansard record, and before we begin, would you please state your full name and the capacity in which you appear today?
Yes, my name is Graham Mickelberg, and I'm here with Mr. Sean Arthur to represent the Rifle Company Butterworth veterans.
Thank you, Mr. Mickelberg and Mr. Arthur. Would you like to make a short opening statement before we proceed to questions?
Certainly. Sean and I are here today to represent the remaining survivors of more than 9,000 RCB veterans who were deployed to Butterworth during the period 1970 to 1989. Our experience of the Defence Honours and Awards systems is that Defence is unwilling to confirm the criteria it uses to classify the nature of service. This affects the whole system of Defence Honours and Awards. Veterans lack confidence in the capacity of Defence to effectively and fairly administer the system of Defence Honours and Awards. The approach used by Defence to classify the nature of service for ADF deployments needs to be reformed to make it more objective and transparent. The Defence Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal has an important role to play in keeping Defence honest. However, there are some systemic weaknesses in some of its processes that need to be addressed, and we've proposed an amendment to the Defence Act in addressing this. In addressing the terms of reference, we've used our experience of trying to have the nature of our service reclassified by Defence and of appearing before the Defence Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal. When the decision to deploy RCB to Butterworth was made in 1973, the Whitlam government, senior departmental officials and the service chiefs had very serious concerns about the safety of RAF personnel, their families and the 2 squadrons of RAF fighter aircraft that were located at the base. However, despite the service chiefs being fully cognisant of the risks of terrorist attack on the base, they recommended to the government that our service could be presented publicly as being for training purposes. We submit that that was a deception. For nearly 20 years, RCB veterans have engaged with Defence in an effort to have the operational tasks they undertook acknowledged and to have their service reclassified as warlike service. The result of communicating our service as being for training purposes was that our service has been classified as peacetime since then. Defence has refused all approaches by RCB veterans to be provided with the criteria that Defence has used to classify our service as peacetime. Our service has been reviewed by the Defence Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal, and that tribunal consisted of the Chair, Mr Scahill, and 2 other members, a retired Rear Admiral and a retired Air Force Air Commodore. They received more than 240 submissions from RCB veterans, most of whom who'd been deployed to the base to protect it. The tribunal concluded that we were deployed to Butterworth to provide added security for the defence of the base against communist insurgents, and that our deployments were, quote, never for the sole or predominant purpose of training, as was asserted at times, for diplomatic nicety or political expedience, unquote. We've written to Minister Keogh requesting the tribunal's report not be actioned because we have some serious concerns about it. Firstly, none of the 3 members of the tribunal had any knowledge or experience of land force counterinsurgency operations of the type we undertook at Butterworth. We submit this was a major shortcoming, as that lack of knowledge and experience significantly limited their capacity to analyse the evidence presented by the veterans and to arrive at an accurate and objective assessment of our service. It was acknowledged the base was at risk of attack by communist insurgents. You can see this by virtue of what the Joint Intelligence Organisation assessed as the likely approaches of attack by the communist insurgents. We've provided a copy of their assessment of that page, to you as document 1, and we request that be tabled. The tribunal acknowledged in its proceedings that the veterans, quote, were in fact on the ground at Butterworth and recounting factual experience that defence in its inquiry chose not to challenge, unquote. However, despite the eyewitness evidence of many veterans that made submissions and the other evidence provided to the tribunal, it concluded that our service was not warlike. We submit that the tribunal's analysis and conclusions of key aspects of evidence presented to it, particularly the evidence of the veterans, reflects that they didn't fully understand aspects of the evidence and give adequate attention or weight to the veterans' lived experience of the operations they undertook. This unwillingness to give weight to the veterans' eyewitness evidence is at odds with the approach previously taken by the tribunal in other matters it has dealt with. Of significance, I would draw your attention to the application by the Honourable Guy Barnett MP for the award of the Victoria Cross to Teddy Sheehan, where the tribunal stated at paragraph 39 of page 11 of its decision that, quote, independent contemporaneous accounts are usually given significant weight, unquote. Of particular relevance to the veterans is that the tribunal in its assessment of our service applied legislation and policy that did not exist at the time of our service. That legislation and policy included new definitions for warlike and peace and non-warlike service. These definitions didn't exist at the time of our service. It's our submission that the tribunal should have applied legislation and policy that existed when the decision was taken in 1973. We consider the tribunal, however, is very relevant and has an important role to play in keeping defence honest. And we would suggest to your committee that Defence's proposed amendments that would limit the tribunal's authority to investigate appeals put before them need to be looked at very carefully, because ultimately the tribunal is the only body that currently exists that will provide the capacity for veterans and their families to have the service of their loved ones examined. The tribunal in its report was particularly critical of Defence and its approach to dealing with the veterans, and indeed matters relating to how our service was classified. The tribunal said in its report, and I quote, Defence's advice to ministers was at various times inadequate and misleading, fundamentally flawed, and that it seemed to the tribunal that, colloquially speaking, Defence had been making it up as it goes. I would submit to you these are very serious statements by the tribunal that Defence at the highest level, that is the CDF and Secretary level, need to take on board. Of very serious concern to us is that during the inquiry, a person who had assisted us in preparation of our submission and was subsequently called as an expert witness by the tribunal advised me that he could no longer assist us because it had been considered that any further involvement by him might potentially be a conflict of interest. We reported this to the tribunal, and not unreasonably we expected it would investigate this. However, we received no response. We recommend to you that the criteria used for an inquiry by the tribunal into veteran service should not be left to the discretion of the tribunal or Defence and should be clearly articulated in a way that is transparent. This would require amendment of the Defence Act, and we've submitted a proposed amendment, and we request that that document be tabled. That Defence, in collaboration with the tribunal, should conduct a thorough inquiry of the approach taken to the classification of ADF deployments, to provide a methodology that is coherent, objective, transparent, and that conforms to the principles of the Committee of Inquiry into Defence Awards, and to make that methodology available to the public. In closing, I would make the following comments. Other witnesses have said to you the recognition of service is important to those who are serving, those that have served, and to families. That recognition of service is also very important to RCB veterans and their families. The decision of the Whitlam government to accept the advice of the service chiefs to communicate the deployment of our service as being for training purposes was a calculated and cynical political decision. It was designed to deceive the Australian public about the true reason behind why the Whitlam government had decided to send army troops back into Southeast Asia. That an Australian government would do this, we would submit, is a national disgrace, a disgrace that has been perpetrated by Defence for the past 50 years by portraying our service in defending the airbase at Butterworth as being no different than garrison duties undertaken at Australian bases. Defence over time has been presented with irrefutable primary evidence as to the true nature of our service, yet it's prevaricated and obfuscated at every turn, including on occasions providing ministers with advice that was misleading and wrong. Why would Defence do that? The reason is clear. Defence officers and officials have been loath to change the official position as advised by Defence to the government in 1973. I would draw your attention to the message of thanks provided by the Malaysian Chief of Defence Force on the 50th anniversary of the deployment of RCB. I've provided a copy of that message and I would ask it to be tabled as part of our submission. I think it's important for the veterans around Australia who are listening to this hearing that I read this out. The CDF said, that is the Malaysian CDF said, your presence and sacrifice here in Malaysian soil in protecting the RMA at Butterworth base during the resurgence of the communist insurgency in 1970 to 1989 was a remarkable contribution and had always been the highlight of your presence here in Malaysia. I'd have to say to you, there was no ceremony by our government to acknowledge the 50th anniversary of RCB deployment. Instead, the only message from the Chief of the Australian Army and the Minister for Defence, Senator Reynolds, was to sustain the deception that RCB was a training commitment. Defence, in its submission to your inquiry, has stated that recognising the contribution of Defence personnel is, quote, a key responsibility and a privilege of command, unquote. We submit it is also a key responsibility of Defence officials and government acting on behalf of the nation. The approach taken by Defence over many years to addressing the concerns of RCB veterans has been nothing short of disgraceful. Its advice has sought to cast RCB veterans in a negative and dismissive and condescending way that is a gratuitous affront to the soldiers who served our nation. The Tribunal have covered this in pages, we've addressed this in pages 5 and 6 of our submission. It is also confirmed in the Tribunal's report of its inquiry.
Mr Mickelberg, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we do have limited time today. I know many senators...
I understand that. I'm coming close to the end of it.
Can I ask you to say your opening statement?
Yeah, I will. I'd have to say in 47 years of my service in the Army, I'm ashamed to say that ADF officers since 1973 have knowingly fostered and lent themselves to sustaining this deception. Sadly, a great many of RCB veterans have passed away without the true nature of their service. Australia is on the threshold of an election, and this injustice can and should be addressed by our government now. The last thing I want to say is this. I want to emphasise to Defence and the government that they both need to know that regardless of anything else, RCB veterans will not give up our fight until the true nature of our service is recognised. We deserve an apology from the CDF and the Secretary for the way that Defence has conducted themselves. I'd like to ask Sean Arthur to briefly make some final comments before you take questions.
Could we please make these very brief, Mr Arthur, because we do only have till 10:30, so and we do want some time for questions.
Thank you very much. I will. It was already a brief statement, but I'll make it briefer. Other witnesses have appeared before you and have expressed serious concerns of the Defence Department and the Defence Honours Awards and Appeals Tribunal. The RCB veterans also have concerns about the Department and the Tribunal. The Tribunal processes are not completely fair on a number of grounds and would have it that it enjoys a statutory independence, which of course it technically does. However, while the Tribunal does enjoy a state of official independence, we believe that culturally it has been captured by the Defence Department. We assert this because after our experience appearing before the Tribunal, some things otherwise cannot be explained. Although the Tribunal is not a court of law, it is an appellate body. Its hearings follow some of the processes of a court. It takes evidence from the appellants, witnesses are sworn in under oath or affirmation, and it observes other binding procedures in the conduct of reviews and inquiries. In the Tribunal's own submission to this committee, Mr Scahill stated that the Tribunal is not adversarial. That the Tribunal believes this to be the case is extraordinary to the veterans, because if it is not, in theory, we submit that at least it is in practice. It is our experience that the veterans appearing before the Tribunal process is often very confronting. The tactics and demeanour employed by the Defence is sometimes borderline offensive. As an example of that, at our tribunal, the RCB one, The Defence Department representative compared our service at Butterworth with a training exercise in Australia. He said this to our very face, and the contempt for our military service was on full display. During the Tribunal's review of RCB service, Defence actually sat alongside the veterans and aggressively prosecuted its position and cross-examined our witnesses. They did so with all the power and legal might of the state against ex-diggers who have little in the way of legal or financial resources. I would remind this committee that those ex-servicemen and women who face the tribunal are appellants, we're not defendants. What's more, the RCB veterans who have made submissions gave evidence to the tribunal were actual eyewitnesses to the historical events that were subject of the tribunal's inquiry. We are happy to defend our statements under oath, but on the other hand, the functionaries representing the defence at the tribunal were permitted to kibitz from the sideline. Not once did they provide evidence under oath, nor did they face cross-examination. The department never challenged in any way the veterans would have liked. In all their wrongful opinions entered into the public record without objection, apart from the comments Mr. Scahill chose to negate. Does this sound like procedural fairness to the inquiry? And if this state of affairs is not...
Mr. Arthur, could I ask you please to wrap it up, because we do want to get to the questions, and it's been quite a long opening statement.
Yes, sir, I'll wrap it up there. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We'll go to questions. Senator Darmingham, did you have questions?
Yeah. Yes, thank you. From listening to what you've said, thank you for your submission and your comments. It sounds like the key one is really your recommendation around coherent, objective, transparent, publicly available decision making. Can I ask whether your organisation has a view about, or whether you heard the discussions earlier this morning around previous submitters or in the other hearings around inaction versus warlike operations, whether you have a view about that, and also applying some flexibility to decision making within the context of your recommendations around them being coherent, objective, transparent and publicly available, please?
Well, look, certainly they need to be all of those aspects, but the whole system of defence honours and awards needs to have integrity. And the fact that the previous witnesses at the first public hearing made it quite clear that they were very concerned that the system lacked integrity. That seems to me to be the cornerstone upon which any system of defence honours and awards that recognises service, whether it be service for bravery or service in a campaign, which is basically what our service was, it needs to be based on integrity. That must be the foundation. And we submit that based on our experience of the last 20 years, Defence is loath to reveal the way in which it approaches recognition of service, and as a result of that, we feel the system has no integrity.
Thank you. And so what impediments, if any, do you think exist in order to achieve the kind of integrity that you say is lacking? Like in your experience, what would you say they are? There needs to be
cultural change within Defence. The fact is that at the moment what we have that exists is that within the nature of service branch, which exists within headquarters ADF and responds to the Vice Chief of the Defence Force, they're the people that decide how is service classified. And then as a result of that, recommendations are made to government, and then government decides whether it's warlike, non-warlike or peacetime. That affects the veterans. It affects the veterans in several ways. It affects what medallic recognition might be made, but it also affects whether or not they might have access to repatriation benefits. But at its most basic level, it affects the morale of the people involved, because they're doing a job on behalf of the nation, whatever it might be. And arguably, whether or not they openly seek recognition, innately, it's human nature to expect that what we do for our nation, in this case, ought to be properly recognised. I would say to you, it's simply not good enough for our politicians our leaders to appear on Anzac Day very solemnly and declare how important veterans are in their service and then promptly forget about it on the 26th of April, because that is what is happening in our nation right now.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Senator Darmingham. Senator Roberts, do you have questions?
Yes, I do, please, Chair.
Go ahead, please, Senator Roberts.
Thank you both for your service and for your excellent submission, comprehensive submission, and for your excellent and very clear statements and answers. Let me just go through a few words that I want to just confirm with you that you've used today, and then ask the question. Integrity must be a foundation, you said. Cultural change is needed in defence, you said very emphatically, and I must say, Mr. Mickelberg, very clearly. You want rectification and an apology for the duplicity. Process and criteria are important, but they're not transparent. There's a lack of trust. There's a deception to portray your service as other than it was. Training, not defence against communist insurgents, armed communist insurgents. And you also said, quote, defence is making it up as it goes. Now to my question. We've heard from witnesses this morning about a general reluctance to classify peacekeeping missions as warlike. We've also heard some people who are quite satisfied with the Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal. I get the sense from your submission that the issue isn't necessarily criticism of the tribunal or its members, but more the fact that they are restricted in exactly what they can consider. So your recommendation is that the tribunal be allowed to take more things into consideration and not be forced to take what defence or someone else said back at the time as unchangeable. Is that a fair summary?
Well, let me say this. Firstly, it wasn't us that made the statement that defence was making it up as it goes. It was actually the tribunal in its report. And I think that's an important point to make. But in relation to your other question, I think essentially what's needed here is that, and we've said that we think the tribunal has an important role and that it should continue to do that. But it seems to us that you can't just look at this whole system of defence honours and awards only in the context of bravery awards, because by and large, the whole system of defence honours and awards underpins recognition of service, whether it be peacetime, whether it be a non-warlike, or whether it be warlike. Compounding the whole approach that is taken by defence and which affects serving and ex-serving members is that, for whatever reason, defence continues to change the goalposts. So, for example, definitions of service introduced in 1993, changed again in 2018. The rationale for that, unclear. But what it does do is it makes for a very confusing environment for defence itself, for the veterans, for families, for the Defence Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal. I think what's needed here is a root and branch review of how defence classifies service, what is the role of defence relative to the Defence Honours and Awards Appeals Tribunal, what powers should it have, should it be more independent than it currently is, should it have other powers beyond what it's got. We probably don't have time today to address this in the depth that's needed, but I do think there's certainly a need for a review of how defence goes about classifying service and the role that the tribunal has to play relative to what defence does or doesn't do.
Thank you. Do you have anything to add, Mr. Arthur?
No, thank you very much for the opportunity to represent the veterans.
Thank you. We've heard evidence repeatedly in this inquiry of senior brass in the Afghanistan conflict receiving medals for being in warlike service, sometimes even medals for being in action, while they spent the majority of their time in air-conditioned luxury thousands of kilometres away from the area of operations. Does that discrepancy with the reluctance to classify these missions as warlike cause angst in your experience? I guess I'm really asking whether there's a perception of a two-tier system when it comes to awards, and if so, the ramifications on trust.
Look, Senator, I spent most of my career in what we term the long peace. So our government had been severely burnt by being involved in Vietnam, and most of my career, unfortunately, was spent training people for war. And so I spent a lot of time training people for that eventually ended up in East Timor and Afghanistan and Iraq. But the reality is that I think where this mistake in relation to the Distinguished Service Cross started to occur was how it was initially defined in the letters patent in terms of inaction. The fact is, anyone who knows anything about higher command in war knows that if a senior commander is that close to the action where they might get shot at, then they've failed. The fact is, their job is to be well back, looking at the bigger picture to ensure that we can actually succeed in winning the war. And so ultimately, it's an afterthought, but they've now changed the award and taken out the inaction and in command. That should have been done in the first place. I don't think there's a two-tier system. If there is, it's existed for a long time. In Vietnam, it was automatic almost, and I can't think of any task force commander or battalion commander who was not awarded the Distinguished Service Order, which was the second in the old system, was the second highest award after the Victoria Cross in the system of honours and awards. So there's actually precedent for this.
Doesn't that mean, from what your last comments were, doesn't that indicate that it's automatic, that commanders get an award?
I don't know whether it's automatic or not. I mean, the fact is that if you talk to any veterans, particularly from the Vietnam era, they would say there was a system where there was a ration, if you will, of awards. And so any particular unit, for example, an infantry battalion, the CO, the commanding officer, would get a DSO. Probably there might be 2 or 3 military crosses. There might be 2 distinguished service conduct medals that would go to non-commissioned officers or soldiers, and maybe 2 or 3 military medals that would go to non-commissioned officers and soldiers. That was the way it was. I submit that that's an inappropriate system. We ought to be recognising acts of gallantry where they occur. And if a particular unit has 15 acts of gallantry, then they should be recognised.
Chair, that's the end of my questions. I just want to compliment and express my appreciation for Mr. Mickelberg in particular for his bluntness and directness.
Thank you, Senator Roberts. Senator Fawcett, if you're available, I believe you had a question or two.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Gentlemen, thank you. There's been a lot of calls from witnesses for increased transparency in the process, and I noticed recommendation 4 in your submission recommends that the tribunal should use its statutory authority to compel persons, including defence officers and officials, and I assume others within government, to give evidence or produce documents for the purpose of a review or inquiry. Just referring back to the Whitten report in 2021, toward the end of that report, it made a recommendation for a range of FOIs into, I'm assuming, cabinet discussions, ministerial briefs, etc., to understand what defence officials actually briefed the government of the day about the nature of operations in Malaysia. Are you able to tell the committee whether you've had cooperation from people around those FOIs that was recommended in that Whitten report?
Look, Senator, the reality is that over the 20 years that we've been advocating for this, through our own efforts, the veterans have discovered, I'd have to say, a trove of formerly top secret and secret documents that have since been declassified and placed in the National Archives. The tribunal itself, when it reviewed our service, acknowledged that we actually had more information and provided it to them than had ever been available before. And the irony of this is, though, despite this, and we had presented this information previously to Defence in our efforts to have our service reclassified, Defence actually had all this information at its fingertips, but for whatever reason, decided they would continue to deny proper recognition of our service. In fact, I would say to you, there is a document that we've discovered where a briefing was provided to Minister Stuart Robert, in response to a petition made by the RCB veterans to the Parliament that our service be recognised as warlike. That brief made a statement that Defence had made exhaustive investigations and found all the relevant documents. Well, arguably, it can't have been all that exhaustive because it didn't include a hell of a lot of the stuff that we had found through our own efforts through the National Archives. Those efforts include briefs to ministers, the minutes of the Defence Committee in 1973, where Secretary of Defence of the Department of Defence Tang and the service chiefs decided and recommended to the government that our service could be communicated publicly for training purposes. That stuff was there, and yet for whatever reason, Defence has constantly, steadfastly sought to deny proper recognition. Okay,
so I hear that, but in response specifically through the FOI approach, has there been a positive response to the RCB?
Look, to be frank with you, Senator, a number of our members have been at this for more than 20 years, and it's exhausting for them. A lot of them are now, well, I'm 72, some of them are in their late 70s, early 80s, and to be frank, they've been worn down. So a lot of these the applications, specific applications that were referred to in the Whitten report haven't been made. They will be made because that's something that I'm addressing right at the moment. Because, as I said right at the end, regardless of anything else, we're not going away. And I told Minister Keogh this to his face on the 10th of October when we met him, that it doesn't matter a damn to us. We will be here until it's done and dusted.
Well, thank you. And Chair, no further questions, but I just do note, gentlemen, the comment in your covering letter about the report of the Tribunal in 2023 and that there are currently 2 representations by yourselves to the Minister, so that has been noted. Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Mr Mickelberg and Mr Arthur, for your appearance today and your advocacy on behalf of your community and your detailed submission, which the committee appreciates. That concludes today's hearing. Thank you to all witnesses who appeared and to Hansard and Broadcasting for their assistance, and the committee now stands adjourned.